In the first module, we learned how incorporating youth development principles into physical education and physical activity can lead to positive youth outcomes and create better engagement in activities among young people. In the second module, we learned that youth engagement means giving youth power, believing in youth, and allowing them to lead in meaningful ways. We also learned about the benefits of engaging youth in a CSPAT via the 4 E's: equity and inclusion, effectiveness, engagement, and energy. In this third module, we're going to explore the levels of youth engagement and explore practical strategies to increase youth engagement in physical education and physical activity in schools. Hopefully by now you're convinced of the value of youth engagement, both for youth themselves, but also for the benefit of promoting physical education and physical activity in schools. Let's now talk about what youth engagement looks like in practice. This diagram you see depicts the levels of youth engagement, which was adapted from the Northern Ireland Youth Council. Essentially, as you move to the right of the continuum, the power of adults decreases while the power of youth increases. Let's take a moment to explore each level and how this may be demonstrated in physical education and physical activity programming in schools. Oftentimes, as has been mentioned, when it comes to PE and physical activity, youth are seen as recipients or beneficiaries and are not seen as influencers. So oftentimes, schools are in the none category for youth engagement, meaning youth are not included in decisions around physical education and physical activity in schools. One step up from none is tokenism. This is often when adults set an agenda and make decisions, but might invite 1 or 2 young people to the table who may or may not have authentic influence. If a youth leader is invited to be on a school or district task force to provide a youth perspective, but the meeting isn't designed for them or they don't receive any context or support to engage in the meeting, this might be considered tokenism. While it is better than the none category, this often is not a meaningful way to engage youth. Next, consultation is when adults consult youth within adult parameters or within a specific context. For example, youth might be asked to consult on a lesson plan or choose a classroom physical activity from a list of possible options created and curated by adults. Next up is representation. Representation is when a group of youth are put forward to represent their peers. Representation might include engaging a consistent team of youth leaders to sit on the school health index team to inform the assessment process and improvement plan strategies. Perhaps youth might apply to be in these roles, or they might be selected by school leaders. Participation goes a step further than representation. Building on the school health index example, youth might develop and lead a separate youth-driven assessment of the physical education and physical activity environment to be considered in tandem with the school health index and inform the final school health improvement plan strategies. In participation, youth set the agenda, decide on issues and activities, and have joint accountability with adults. Self-managing is the final level of youth engagement and is when youth work with little or no adult authority. Self-managing may be if youth advocate and fundraise to start an intramural program or an activity club like a before-school walking club. And with the approval of the school, youth might manage nearly all aspects of the program or club by themselves. For this activity, I want you to think through the following scenarios and decide what level of youth engagement each is an example of. For this one, the physical education teachers, coaches, and 1 youth meet to plan the PE curriculum activities for the year. This could be tokenism if the youth doesn't get to meaningfully influence the PE curriculum activities. But it also could be seen as consultation if they are getting to lead some aspect of the work and make some meaningful change. A classroom teacher asks one of their students to select the day's energizer from 3 options. This is an example of consultation. Adults are consulting with youth within adult parameters. The other key element of this is that the teacher asks only one student for their opinion. In this last example, youth leaders plan activities for and promote this year's Take Your Parents to PE Week. Now, depending on the origins of this effort, this might fall into 3 different levels. For example, if teachers identified the need to plan activities and asked students to plan selected activities and lead promotional efforts, this might be considered consultation, since they're being asked to lead within a specific context. Now, if a group of youth are asked to lead the planning activities for their peers, it might fall under representation. But let's say youth identify the need to engage parents in physical education to promote a culture of physical activity at home, and then they take it up upon themselves to lead the planning and promotion with some adult support. That might fall under participation. These 3 levels all depend on the origin of the effort. To what extent were youth leading the effort, or were they being asked by an adult to contribute in some way? As we saw from this activity, it's not always that clear-cut where you might fall within the levels of youth engagement. Ultimately, where your effort falls might depend on 1, how the effort originated. Was it the idea of youth or the idea of adults? 2, the extent to which youth are given power. Is it one youth among many adults, or is there a strong group of youth working alongside adults? And 3, finally, how meaningful contributions are. Are they influencing decision-making in any way? In summary, you can use this continuum in 3 ways. You can use it to explicitly consider how youth are being engaged whenever you're planning for them. Many times when we think about issues of equity and authentic engagement, it is important to make the implicit explicit, or our invisible ways of being visible. So rather than just going with the status quo, we can at least intentionally name how youth are being engaged. It is likely that classroom, school, and district decisions maybe often fall in the none category. And if that's the case, the first step to exploring youth engagement opportunities is to just acknowledge where you are at explicitly and honestly. The second way you can use this continuum is by thinking about ways you can bump up or increase your youth engagement. So if you aren't engaging youth at all, try to bump up your engagement from none to tokenism or consultation. If you're at representation, you can bump up your efforts to participation, self-managing, etc. Now, going back to an earlier example, we said that having a meeting with the PE teachers, coaches, and one youth to plan the PE curriculum activities for the year might be tokenism. If it is, ask yourself how you might bump up your youth engagement in that example. One way you can go from tokenism to consultation is by pulling together a youth advisory group to advise on these activities so that there's power in numbers. Then you can perhaps move from consultation to representation by having this youth advisory group receive training on curriculum development basics, inform broader parts of the curriculum, or even facilitate curriculum activities that are developed with support. Finally, this continuum can be used to facilitate conversation, to assess the readiness of your organization to engage youth, and again, make the implicit cultural and structural assumptions explicit. For example, does your organization have the time to prioritize youth? What are your perceptions of youth's ability to lead and make change? How is tradition or a business as usual approach a barrier for engaging youth? In our next and final module, we are going to explore a number of skills that can be incorporated into PE/PA programming that are crucial in building youth participation and engagement. These skills, or forms as we refer to them, are helpful tools when thinking about how to increase youth participation in programming and moving from one level of youth engagement to the next.